Marriage can be a rocky road, but with the right partner, there's little you can't overcome. However, some people don't realize they're with the wrong person until it's too late. When Melissa Woods became pregnant, she was excited to start a new chapter with the love of her life. But after her husband failed her when she needed him the most, she had no choice but to do things alone. She couldn't have known that 15 years later she would receive a letter that would have her questioning everything she thought she knew about him. Melissa Woods spent her entire life in the same small neighborhood in Little Rock, Arkansas. She was raised by traditional parents who taught her the importance of faith, kindness, and compassion from the very beginning. Ever since she was a little girl, Melissa dreamed of finding a love like her parents shared, one built on trust, loyalty, and a deep-rooted connection. She had strong family values and wanted nothing more than to become a wife and mother one day. However, Melissa had no idea that her journey there wasn't going to be easy. Despite only being 2 years younger than him, Melissa grew up in her brother Mitchell's shadow. He had decided on his chosen career path very early on, and after getting accepted to Harvard to study law, Mitchell became their parents' pride and joy. But unlike Mitchell, Melissa had never been career-driven. She wasn't entirely sure what she wanted her job to be. All she knew was that she wanted to keep her head down and get good grades, go to a decent college, and then get on with the rest of her life. When she met Brock Thompson, though, everything seemed to fall into place. During her sophomore year of community college, Melissa first laid eyes on Brock. Melissa was working part-time as a server at her local country club, and she crossed paths with him one sunny afternoon while he was playing golf. Brock, with his charming demeanor and sweet smile, caught Melissa's eye immediately. After his game, Brock approached Melissa and struck up a conversation. Their connection was instant and undeniable, and before long, Brock was asking her out to dinner. Melissa couldn't believe her luck. She felt like she was in a fairy tale. Throughout their meal, Melissa and Brock discovered that they shared far more in common than they ever could have imagined, values-wise at least. They both came from traditional families, with older siblings and parents who got married young. They also learned they shared very similar ideas about what they wished for their futures to look like. Melissa would never usually talk about children on a first date, but Brock brought up the subject, and Melissa was pleasantly surprised that he was so keen to become a father one day. It was clear to both of them that they had found something special in each other, and from there, things moved fast. From the very beginning of their relationship, Brock relished in spoiling Melissa with elaborate gifts, dinners, and flower bouquets. It was only a few months in when Brock asked Melissa to move in with him, and she jumped at the chance to play house with her Prince Charming. Each day, she would come home from work and prepare an extravagant dinner for when Brock returned home from the office. If this was what the rest of her life would look like, Melissa thought, then she looked forward to it greatly. And it was just as well, because the next thing she knew, Brock was asking for her hand in marriage. The two young lovebirds couldn't wait any longer to start the rest of their lives together. Melissa had dreamed about her wedding day since she was a little girl, and now she was finally planning the perfect wedding with the man of her dreams. Once everything was set and the date loomed closer, Melissa and Brock took the time to draft their marriage contract, a tradition in Melissa's church. They wanted to formalize their commitment to each other and establish the foundation for their life together. But when Melissa told her family that they were about to sign the contract, her brother Mitchell called her out of the blue with some words of warning. Mitchell had always been supportive of Melissa, though Mitchell couldn't help but feel compelled to offer some cautionary words as he saw his little sister falling head over heels, about to commit everything to a man she'd only met months before. "Melissa, I understand the importance of tradition, but these contracts can sometimes be one-sided. You're committing to a lot here. What if things change down the road? You need to protect yourself," he explained. Mitchell's words struck a nerve with Melissa, who couldn't help but take it personally. "Mitch, "Why are you being like this?" she snapped in response, getting flustered. "I appreciate your concern, but Brock isn't like that. I trust him completely, and he'd never do anything to harm me," Melissa reassured her brother, her words coming out more defensively than she intended. "This contract is just a formality," she continued. Mitchell, taken aback by her cold response, tried to explain. "I just want to make sure you're protected. These contracts can have long-term consequences, and I don't want to see you get hurt," he advised. But Melissa was adamant. She believed in Brock and their love, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even her brother, cast doubt on that. Melissa kept her brother's words in the back of her head as she signed the contract and finalized their wedding vows for the big day. She knew there was always a chance that something might go wrong. But Brock had been so good to her, and everything was so perfect that she tried to shut any creeping doubts out of her mind. The wedding day finally arrived, and it was a beautiful celebration of Melissa and Brock's love, surrounded by their dearest family and friends. Melissa read her vows to Brock, and when it came time for Brock to read his, Melissa couldn't help but notice her brother looking uncomfortable in the front row. "I promise to always be your biggest cheerleader, your shoulder to lean on, and your partner in all things," Brock began, staring lovingly into Melissa's eyes. "I vow to be the best breadwinner I can be, as long as you keep cooking those amazing meals for us," he joked, which got a big laugh from the crowd, from everyone except Mitchell. Melissa noticed her brother's reaction and felt a pang of uncertainty, but she pushed it aside. The rest of the day went by without a hitch, and before they knew it, months had flown by, and the Thompsons were relishing in every moment of married bliss. If only they knew what awaited them. Melissa and Brock embraced married life with open arms, and their next natural step was to finally make their dream of parenthood a reality. Brock often made comments about wanting a son to carry on the family name, and Melissa would playfully correct him that any child would be a blessing. But by the time their anniversary rolled around, after months of trying for a baby, their families were beginning to bombard them with questions about when they would finally have kids, and it quickly became clear that the journey to becoming parents was not going to be an easy one. As much as Melissa dreamed about one day being a mother, it felt as though life had other plans. She began to worry that she had something wrong with her, that meant she wouldn't be able to have children at all. Brock tried to reassure her, but every negative pregnancy test only seemed to confirm her worst fears. So after more and more months went by with no success, the Thompsons decided to see a doctor to get to the bottom of their fertility issues. Melissa breathed a sigh of relief when the doctor revealed that she was perfectly healthy. Their problems weren't with her, they were because of Brock. The couple gripped each other tighter as they discovered that it was Brock's challenges with fertility preventing them from getting pregnant. Brock got defensive and upset, but Melissa tried to reassure him, reminding him that they were in this together and that they would overcome this obstacle as a team. From the moment they got home from the appointment, Brock got to researching alternative methods, and it didn't take him long to have his heart set on going down the route of IVF treatment. Would this finally bring them the child they had spent so long praying for? Of course, Melissa and Brock knew that IVF came at a price, a very high one. But with so much disappointment, the Thompsons would stop at nothing to make their dreams of parenthood come true. The couple put all their other life plans on hold and got stuck into the IVF process. After months of vigorous fertility treatments and perseverance, their hope and prayers finally paid off. The moment they discovered that this round of treatments had been successful, they felt like they could breathe for the first time since the process began. Still, Melissa was hesitant to tell anyone the good news. Once she reached her second trimester, the couple broke the news to her and Brock's family, and everyone was over the moon. Brock's overly involved mother had endless questions about the logistics of the process, and she and her husband made some hushed comments about how IVF was a unique journey for them. But neither Brock nor Melissa let it get to them. Brock's father followed up by asking if they knew the gender yet, and Melissa informed him that she had decided to only find out once the baby was born, Everything was going better than anticipated with Melissa's pregnancy until she and Brock went to their third trimester scan to check on the baby's progress. During the scan, the doctor, in a slip of the tongue, referred to the baby as she. Melissa laughed awkwardly and looked at her husband, whose reaction was immediate. He grew visibly uncomfortable and began to shift in his seat. The doctor apologized profusely, but after the appointment, tension still hung in the air between Melissa and Brock. When they got home, what started as a small disagreement quickly escalated into a heated argument as soon as Melissa understood that her husband's discomfort was all to do with the idea of having a daughter. Hurt and confused, Melissa confronted Brock and the argument grew more intense. They exchanged cruel words and their shouting got louder until Brock made a decision that would change everything. He told Melissa that he couldn't do this anymore, needed some space, and left their home, slamming the door behind him. Melissa didn't know what to do. She felt like the ground had collapsed beneath her. She called Mitchell in floods of tears, and that evening he drove over to her home to comfort her. She had no idea if Brock would come back that day, or at all. But every potential possibility was too painful to think about, especially with a baby on the way. By the time Melissa went into labor, she couldn't afford to dwell on the uncertainty of her relationship with Brock. She had to stay strong for the sake of her child. She couldn't understand how her husband could do this to her. Had he run away because he was afraid? Did he ever actually want to have a baby with her? For all she knew, Brock had left her, abandoned their home, and completely disappeared, not contacting her even when she gave birth to their daughter. Melissa was totally blindsided, but from the moment Paige was born, she couldn't think about anything else other than providing the best life possible for her little miracle. After Brock abandoned Melissa, she was left to navigate the challenges of motherhood alone. Luckily, she had Mitchell and her parents by her side, but she still struggled to grapple with being a stay-at-home mother. And with their separation, she couldn't understand how Brock could leave her knowing that she was raising their child alone. Despite his absence, Brock continued to fulfill his financial obligations, paying child support for Paige. However, he made no attempt to contact Melissa, meet Paige, or be a part of their lives. Melissa had little choice but to continue raising Paige as a single mother and taking care of the household. Years flew by, and Melissa and Paige formed an unimaginably strong bond. Throughout Paige's childhood, Melissa was determined to devote everything she had to being the best mother possible and had no time left over to dwell on Brock's abandonment. At first, she held out hope that he might come back to them. But as years turned into a decade, Melissa decided that even if he did reach out to meet his daughter, he'd missed his chance. When Paige turned 15, Melissa unexpectedly met someone new. It was a chance encounter that quickly blossomed into a deep and meaningful relationship. For the first time in years, Melissa allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't revolve solely around her daughter. She was nervous to introduce Paige to Eric since the two of them had been a two-woman team for so long, but their meeting went better than expected. The two got along swimmingly. However, they couldn't play happy families for too long because Melissa's newfound happiness was short-lived. Brock, who had been absent from their lives for so long, somehow discovered that Melissa had a new boyfriend. One afternoon, when Melissa was going through her mail, she saw an unusual letter addressed to her. It only took reading the first line for her to burst into tears. The letter from Brock's legal team explained that their client had fulfilled his portion of the marriage contract by providing financial support for the past 15 years. And he'd even gone above and beyond by financially supporting Paige, even though she wasn't biologically his child. Melissa couldn't believe what she was reading. She continued scanning the letter, struggling to see through tears. It explained that Brock claimed that Melissa had not fulfilled her end of the marriage contract by failing to clean for him for the past 15 years. As a result, he was suing her for 15 years' worth of housework. Melissa was overwhelmed with shock and betrayal all over again. The second page of the letter enclosed a note from Brock directly, which read, "I must also express my disappointment in your recent choices, which seem to indicate a deviation from the terms of our agreement. While I understand that circumstances change, it is important to uphold the commitments we made to each other." Melissa was dumbfounded. How did he know about Eric? "This breach of contract is not something our client takes lightly. Our client is prepared to take whatever action is necessary to ensure that his rights are protected and that justice is served." Melissa continued reading and began to panic. By the time Melissa finished reading the letter, she hadn't even realized how fast her heart was beating. She stood in her kitchen with the letter clutched tightly in her hand, overcome by the idea that Brock had burst back into her life to try and sue her after everything he'd done all those years ago. Without hesitation, she picked up the phone and called Mitchell to come over and help calm her down. Hearing how distraught she was, he got there right away. Melissa knew that if anyone would be able to counter Brock's legal team, it was her brother. And by the time he got there, she was already feeling more optimistic. When Mitchell arrived, Melissa explained the situation, her voice trembling with fear. She knew how powerful Brock and his family were, and she was nervous that Mitchell would smugly try to rub it in her face since he'd warned her about the contract all those years ago. She underestimated her brother. He listened carefully and immediately took the enclosed contract from her and began to read, looking for any kind of loophole that could work in Melissa's favor. He was gobsmacked that someone could treat someone else like this, and it devastated him that this was happening to his sister. But after what felt like an eternity, Mitchell finally found something. Melissa was beginning to spiral about, having to give everything she had to a man who hadn't bothered to come and meet his daughter for 15 years of her life. Mitchell reassured her that the court process would be stressful, but he was determined that with the loopholes he'd found, they would win. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Melissa sat nervously beside Mitchell, with Eric and Paige watching from the gallery. As Brock's lawyer presented their case, Mitchell calmly countered each argument, explaining to the judge that Brock's case was nonsense on two different grounds. Mitchell's words rang out across the courtroom as he made his case. If Brock knew about Melissa's alleged failure to clean for 15 years and did nothing about it, he waived his right to enforce that provision of the contract. By waiting to enforce action until he discovered that Melissa was in a new relationship, 15 years later, he implicitly agreed to overlook the issue, he said. The judge listened intently as Mitchell flexed his expertise and made compelling points that weakened Brock's case. Melissa couldn't look Brock in the eye as the legal teams made their concluding arguments. And not before long, the judge hushed the room to inform them that he'd made his decision. Melissa felt her eyes welling up with tears as the judge ruled in her favor, throwing out Brock's case. A sense of relief washed over her as she left the courthouse, hugging Eric and Paige and seeing Brock's sheepish expression for what she hoped would be the last time. In the following weeks, with the help of Mitchell's legal knowledge, Melissa finally filed for a formal divorce from Brock and made arrangements for her and Paige to move in with Eric. It was the final step in closing the painful chapter of her life, ready to open up another filled with love and new beginnings. While Melissa was left completely alone during the scariest part of her life, she had no choice but to adapt to her situation. Over time, she learned to trust herself and adapt to change. By the time Brock came around with yet another disruptive surprise, Melissa was prepared to fight back. But this time, she wasn't going to let him get away with it. We wish Melissa and Paige all the best in the future and hope they build a beautiful life, facing whatever challenges lay ahead together.